welcome. I am Jeff Koch. I'm the president and CEO of United Methodist Insurance. We are the denomination's insurance program. We are rooted in the Book of Discipline, and we serve any ministry that's ever been connected to the United Methodist Church, but especially those who are currently in the connection. If you have some questions, drop them in the chat, and I will monitor them, and we'll go over them with our experts at the end of their presentation. And this is an especially important topic to me today because property is almost always your largest asset. And when it comes to insurance, it is the biggest driver of your cost. And so it's important, I think, that you have a well-maintained and orderly property. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about that today. Carlin Beekman and Matt Messier will be our presenters today. They are from Foundry. Foundry is a partner of the General Counsel on Finance and Administration, and we are delighted to have them since the denomination has billions of dollars of assets that need to be looked after. And so I'm going to open us up with a word of prayer, and then I'll turn it over to Carlin's capable hands. Lord, please make us good stewards of the gifts that you have given us, that we have been granted, and that we may use them to better serve your mission here and make disciples wherever we go. Amen. Carlin, it's all yours.
Well, it is good to be with you all. We have some slides we're going to walk through. It's afternoon in my time zone, but this morning or afternoon, whenever you're watching this or wherever you join us from today. So Carlin Beekman with Foundry Commercial's Mission Property Group. So all Matt and I do is work with nonprofits, predominantly religious organizations, and helping them steward their real estate. And so, Matt, I'll let you introduce yourself and give a little more context about kind of how we enter this conversation, and we'll jump into the good stuff.
Yeah. Matt Messier with Foundry. I kind of lead the Mission Property Group, we call it. Foundry is a full-service commercial real estate firm, but there is a vertical, if you will, that specializes in working with churches, denominations, not-for-profits. Really, our goal is to help our partners be good stewards with the real estate that the Lord's entrusted them with. And we won't, you can always look us up if you'd like more information on us, but really today's webinar is about you. We ask questions at any time. We don't mind being interrupted. And we're going to just kind of go through and look at a few things that hopefully will be of help to you all. And then I'm going to send it to Carlin and start with the life cycle of a church.
Yes, well, so we have found that this is often a helpful way to start this conversation when it comes to thinking about the structure or the assets that a church has. And all organizations have a life cycle ultimately. And so what we have done is kind of tailored this to what we have seen through our experience with over 3,000 churches we've helped with different property matters. And so I'll kind of walk through this, and we'll be interested to hear your thoughts as we continue on. But we typically see that when it starts, that really kind of the beginning of many churches is a vision, is someone has this calling of what they feel the Lord is leading them to. And naturally, as that percolates in their heart and grows, they want to share that vision with people. And as they share that vision and share what God is calling them to, relationships naturally occur. And you start to build something together and have meaningful dialogue and meaningful, true missional work. And so as relationships grow, you start to do ministry together. You start doing a feeding program on Saturday afternoons. You even have childcare, different pieces you care for so that the parents can have different conversations. I mean, the ministry just naturally starts to happen as the relationships grow. And as ministry is really happening, we often see that there is a need for structure, that there is, hey, okay, how are we going to organize ourselves? What is the, who's on the board, and what does our pastoral leadership look like? And one of the key pieces of structure is your facility. Where are we going to meet consistently? How are we going to kind of, come together and have some consistency there? And so you build all of these things together. And what we have found is that as you get your structure in place, if you aren't revisiting your vision, not having to totally change the vision, but recasting it and reminding yourself and your whole crew you're moving along with of why we felt called to do this to begin with, that then you really start to lose vision. When you're not revisiting that and remembering of what God's calling you to, you lose vision. And as vision is lost, relationships tend to fracture. There is some disagreements, or there's, well, why did so and so want to do this? Because we think we should be going in this direction. And there just starts to be the fracturing of relationships. And when relationships start to get fractured, it's really hard to do ministry together. And it's really hard to get back on to the things that you had felt God was calling you to in the first place. And as there's a lack of ministry happening, you're often left with structure. And so have oftentimes a large building and don't have the same ministry life happening that happened when the structure was originally in place. And so this is obviously, as all of us know on this call today, this has 1,000 different stories and bullet points under it. So by no means are we painting with a broad brush, but we do feel like it's helpful to remind ourselves that ultimately the structure is a tool for the ministry. And I think with that, Matt, you'll kind of start to talk through kind of how we view the lens of property when it comes to ministry.
Yeah, we think it's vitally important that ministry should dictate real estate, and oftentimes we'll see groups, have real estate dictate their mission or ministry. Well, we got this building, or we're at this location, we need to figure something out to do with it, and we don't think that's really the lens that it should be looked through. So on the next slide, basically, I've used this for many years, and I worked with my dad for 35 years, and he would always tell us, me and my brothers, in life in general, if you get the first button right, then the rest of the buttons will fall into place. And when you are looking at church real estate, or the first button is really ministry and mission. What is the church looking to achieve? Where is the Lord leading them? And when you understand that, then you can build the real estate strategy around that. You can understand how much staff you need to hire, what location you should be in, all kinds of things, how big a facility. But that's really important. The first step is, where's the Lord leading us? Where are we being called to? And when we can understand that and follow that, all the other buttons will fall into place. So we'll keep always reminding everybody, hey, what is the filter of what you should be looking at? Anything you want to add to that, Carlin?
No, I think that both this and the life cycle just really ground us in kind of how we at Foundry really approach when it comes to churches having property matters. And I think that is why we're a partner of the GCFA, and even why Jeff has invited us to say that this is so much more than just assets we're talking about. This is ministry stewardship. And so with that, now I know you were going to kind of get us into the bulk of what we're talking about today, which is around deferred maintenance and just stewarding the assets.
Yeah, a number of the groups we talk with, and oftentimes basically have a facility that, as Carlin was talking about structure early on and whatever, it really served a great purpose. And it was a benefit to the church and helped them proclaim the gospel in a much more efficient way. Had tons of Sunday school. They may have had a gymnasium and had all kinds of programs there. But what we're seeing today is that oftentimes the building is becoming much more of a hindrance sometimes to mission and ministry, because people are pouring just a lot of money into boilers and roofs, and things continue to go wrong on it. Here in Florida, we call that a gator. It slowly eats up the church. And so the goal really is to understand what are some of the things that you can do to do a better job to handle some of these physical plan issues, plan ahead. And deferred maintenance is one of the biggies. We were talking with one denomination, and they told us that 85% of their churches were one roof or one boiler, one basically major capital expense away from closure. And so this is not an uncommon thing at all. And so the goal is to understand and to look again at the lens and to say, hey, okay, we have this big building. How do we resolve deferred maintenance? How do we get ahead of it? How do we become proactive as opposed to reactive? And so we're going to go over a few things. And again, please chime in, when you can, if you like.
So I think with this, yeah, as we think about kind of the challenge with deferred maintenance and with those pieces, we wanted to talk through some of the tools that either we've been able to kind of help come alongside church leaders with, or have just seen within the real estate world can be really helpful when trying to get our arms around, okay, what do we have and what is the plan for caring for what we have? And so one thing, and this will be in the follow-up email to this webinar, that we have worked alongside a number of denominational leaders, including the United Methodist Church, in creating is this kind of property health assessment. And so this is a self-assessment, about 5 to 6 pages, that a church leader, a lay leader or a clergy member can do, that just kind of gets their arms around what we have. So you're looking at, obviously, square footage and property acreage, but also, are there current tenants in the property? Is there a cemetery on campus? Just kind of a holistic snapshot of, okay, this is our general property information. And then in the pages following, there is kind of a red, yellow, green assessment of the major items in your property, such as roof, HVAC, boiler, parking lot, ADA access, fire panel and fire control. So these are the items that in our experience with churches are often ones that if they're not managed well or proactively at least assessed, they can really, it takes one of them having a major issue, like Matt was saying, and it can cause ultimately sometimes crisis, where it's how are we ever going to pay for this? And what did we think was going to happen when we put the roof on 20 years ago? We should have saved money for the inevitability of having to shift this. And so like I said, this will be sent out after, and it really is just a starting place for churches to get their arms around, okay, where do we currently stand with our major items in our building? And normally this can create a conversation of how are we prepared for what's next? If our roof is over 20 years old, we have to start thinking about how we're going to pay for a roof replacement. If our parking lot is in disarray and has a lot of potholes, that can cause a lot of challenges. Let's think about how we can prepare for those expenses and what can happen. And so the last thing I'll say about this that is very common, especially in churches, is kind of the leadership transitions that naturally happen from different board members changing and different key leaders shifting into different roles. And we have found if churches keep a document like this somewhat consistent in their files, it can really help the groups to come, because it does often, we find with facilities, fall to 1 or 2 people that have raised their hand faithfully for many years, and they kind of know everything. They know how to kind of turn the little knob on the boiler when it gets funky, and how to do different things. And so having some of that documented can really help the generations to come too. So the next piece, and Matt, feel free to jump in, is just some tools and thoughts that we have around managing your property and being prepared for kind of what is next. Depending on the size of your property, it is often helpful to have either a staff or a team of lay leaders be responsible for kind of the efficiency and just effective kind of overall operations on your property. For a large office building, they have property managers that manage the property and are, not only changing out light bulbs and looking at things like that, but are preventatively, changing out filters and AC units, or, that leak in the wall wasn't there 2 weeks ago. We need to address what's happening there, or kind of tracking what's going on. And that really does need to occur. We find that it's challenging for churches that are predominantly using their space really heavily, a couple times a week. It's not maybe, every day for multiple hours. And you really need to get your arms around kind of what the state is. Yes, please
I'll
go.
just jump in, Carlin. And again, we sometimes, there's big churches, but there's lots of smaller rural churches. We were working with a church not too long ago, and they're on septic, and no one really thinks about septic. But no one knew where the septic was at. And it happened to be, I think, under the parking lot, which is not a great place for it. But the point is that in this instance, one is no one knew it, and then it probably wasn't being taken care of properly. So even something as simple as this could be a little small rural church where you put all this information together so that you're always trying to get to the posture of proactiveness versus reactiveness. Proactiveness is typically going to be a lot cheaper than reactiveness. So, but even so, when we talk building, it doesn't matter if it's a 2,000 square foot building or a 20,000 square foot building. Having effective operations and understanding how to twist this and turn that and where this is at is really super important.
It's a great point. And ultimately that leads to kind of, ultimately all of this is trying to have sustained value in your asset so that this tool that is serving your ministry can sustain and have long-term strategy plans. Because to Matt's exact point, there has to be a proactive strategy, or if everything is reactive, then you're just going to constantly be chasing what's next. And we really do feel with property matters, the more forward thinking there can be. Matt will get into this later, but reserving capital for these expenses before it's needed is crucial. It just helps the church not go into a season of crisis, but as opposed to just being able to kind of take each step as it comes. And then the last couple things are common sense, but are part of this conversation as well. Obviously need to make sure that if you have a mortgage, that's being tracked consistently. And then same with utilities, like who is not only making sure that's paid, but is tracking it over time. Things like the water bill dramatically increasing can point to issues that should be being looked at and addressed. And so having a consistent tracking and crew of people responsible for that can make a big difference. And then I'm sure we'll get into this more. Insurance is a huge piece of managing your property, and churches across the board, we hear really do struggle to not only find insurance, but have a really good insurance provider. And that's why we are so grateful for Jeff and his team that this is a service within the United Methodist Church, because it's crucial and it's very important for the long-term stewardship of your property. And then the last piece here is, just from a code safety perspective, we find very often churches are grandfathered in from a code perspective, or, from different pieces. It's been a church since, the 1920s. So we've had the same building for a long time, or just built on in phases. And so we don't have fire sprinklers, and we're not currently required to, and all of that. And so it's just something to be mindful of, especially as you think about making changes to your property. If that can trigger kind of different safety requirements or local code municipality requirements, you want to have your arms around that so it doesn't surprise you, because that can often be a high expense as well.
Yeah, and if I can address that one, Carlin, just real quick.
Yeah.
Every municipality is different, but oftentimes what a municipality will do is they'll say, if you do a certain amount of improvements or repairs or whatever to the building, and usually it's based upon the assessed value of the building, not the building and the land, but just the building. So let's just say your building's assessed for $500,000, for just round numbers, if you will. Oftentimes they'll say, if you do more than 25% work to the building of the assessed value, so if you were to do $125,000, you got to bring the entire building to code. And so that means retention ponds, parking, all kinds of things. So what you don't want to do is suffer from unintended consequences. So just make sure that whoever's doing your work and so forth understands what are the benchmarks, if you will, that would suddenly set off you having to move more to your building. For example, a church is not required to be ADA. If you're building new, you are, but you're grandfathered in, and you may want to have ADA bathrooms and stuff for your folks, of course. But suddenly you make some changes, and now you got to start knocking out walls and doing some things. So again, just just keep in mind that if you're doing something in this area, that it doesn't suddenly trigger other expenses for you down the road.
That's a great point. And that goes well into this next section, Matt, that I think you're going to address, just around planning for capital expenses.
Yeah, one of the things we'll talk with churches, and this is even my own church, and they say, oh yeah, we're doing okay, we're making budget, but in their budget, there is no money going toward capital improvements down the road. And we've had a group come in and do an assessment of all of our stuff. And they said, yeah, in the next 5 years, you can plan on spending about $600,000 of capital. We're like, no, that seems really high. And next thing you know, we just had a roof go out on a section of our building, and that was $85,000. We had one of our large HVAC units go out, that was $60,000. And so these are major costs. And so you need to plan on that and put that into your budget, just like you would utilities or a salary or anything else. Because when these type of things happen to a property, these big ticket items, it has a ripple effect across the entire church. It just doesn't affect the building. It affects oftentimes ministry that you all can do, because suddenly, well, we can't spend the money over here because we got to fix this roof. And so this idea of preserve your mission, that a proactive plan will help you do that. It doesn't disrupt your operations and your programs. And, we were going to send, some money to a mission in Haiti or whatever. Now we can't do that because we don't have the funds for that. This idea of inspiring donor and lender confidence. I really do feel that when a building is shown to be taken care of, that does instill financial stewardship, as one of the other ones are there, but kind of confidence that we can invest other monies with the church, because if they're taking care of their building, they should be doing a good job on the missions and feeding the hungry and so forth. Kind of like when I go to a restaurant. I go in a restaurant, and if you go to the bathroom, you go in the bathroom and the bathroom looks really nice and everything, kind of like a Buc-ee's nice. It's never that good, but that you're like, the kitchen's probably really clean and so forth. You go into, and the bathroom is nasty. You're like, I don't know if I want to even eat here. And so this idea of taking care of things translates psychologically throughout many areas. And then the lifespan is really important. It's been shown that if someone has, for example, a maintenance plan on their HVAC, where an entity comes out every 6 months and cleans the filter and cleans the coils and does certain things, that is going to last significantly longer and save significantly more dollars than if it's just kind of left alone. So the idea of cleaning gutters, so drainage can occur. The idea of, like I said, having an HVAC maintenance plan, having the roof looked at every so often, all of these things will extend the life plan, and you can get a little bit more out of these major capital items.
I think that's spot on, Matt. And so I know that a lot of what we've been talking about today is just, you're not alone, that a lot of these things are pieces that we learn and hear from the wide variety of churches that we talk to. And so I think you're going to kind of just talk about just kind of almost more the emotional side of some of these matters, other physical things to deal with and quotes to get, that there is, there's an overwhelming aspect to this piece as well that can be hard on a ministry.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we all like options. And there's an expression, it's called tyranny of the urgent. And when something happens, suddenly there is a little bit of a panic mode, but there's also, that's increased when you don't have a lot of options. So when you suddenly have a major issue occur and there's only a little bit of money in savings. Then suddenly you're presented with something that you have to address. It's urgent, but your options are limited. You don't have the money to cover it. Do we have to put a mortgage on our building in order to get the money to do it? And so you really want to get away from that. You really, at the end of the day, want to, if something happens, be able to have as many options available to you so you can choose what's best for the church, not just financially, but as we talked about, physically. And we have seen where, okay, this water leak occurred. We don't have the money to fix the roof, so we'll put a bucket in there in the corner. And then what happens is over time that water leak gets a little bit worse, and now you have mold or mildew in the building. And you can't go into certain buildings. I have been in a number of buildings where they're like, yeah, we don't go over there because it's not healthy to be in that section of the building. And so what you're doing is losing value in that asset. And it's not like you're going to turn around and sell the building tomorrow, but it's just not good stewardship. And so these little things will suddenly turn into big things. And then, as you see in the loss of potential revenue to mission and ministry is that, the one that I'm thinking of, we had a building and there was a vacant area next to the building, and the space next to that vacant area was the children's wing. And I mean, you could sit in the children's wing and smell the mold and mildew coming from the other side. And so what happens is you start having less people coming to church, less people wanted to send their kids into that program. Or even worse so, because it wasn't taken care of, that other area, you couldn't rent it out for another use to a school or a daycare or some other thing. So these things, when that flywheel starts spinning, it just starts getting worse and worse till pretty soon, like I said, something bad happens, and now the tyranny of the urgent kicks in, and you got to make decisions that are not ultimately good decisions in the best interest of the church, because you got to plug that leak now. Anything you want to add to that, Carlin?
No, I think this is a good place to kind of move to our final part here, which is really going to be opening up for dialogue and questions. Is okay, that's a lot of information, both helpful and probably heavy in some ways too. And so what do we do with this, and that's what we want to kind of move into now, because a lot of times we just want to give kudos to everyone who's listening and leaning in here. It's just great to say, okay, we want to be at least hear this, because so often groups just aren't even starting to think about these situations until the roof needs to be replaced or the boiler isn't working on the Saturday before service and it's very cold. And so yeah, I'll kind of pause there and thank you all so much for listening. Hopefully there's helpful pieces, and then we're looking forward to really this part of the conversation.
Right. We do have a few questions, although I want to start off with what I thought was an interesting comment, is that the way to get your building fund started is to put the adult Sunday schools in the worst room in the building.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you may get them to open their wallets or walk out the door. Who knows?
Yeah.
So where does one go if you need outside resources to kind of start this whole process of budgeting and, developing a mission plan for your property?
Yeah. I think one thing that a church could do is a reserve study, and Carlin can kind of dive in that more. And that's what my church did. For example, we seemed to be in a very healthy place. We were making budget, we thought, and but we wanted to kind of get ahead. And so there's organizations that do something called a reserve study, and they'll come in and they'll look at your roof and your HVAC, all components, and they come back to you and say, hey, based upon the age and certain factors, here's kind of what you can expect to spend in the next 5 years or 10 years, depending on the component. And that doesn't mean that they say, well, your air conditioner has 2 years left on it. That doesn't mean you can't squeeze another 2 years out of that thing by fixing this and changing that. But it does put at front of mind that these things are going to happen.
Mhm.
And so how do you get ahead of it? But Carlin, chime
No,
in, please.
I think you're spot on. And I almost think about it in phases. I think a great place to initially start is that kind of self-assessment tool. It's free. You can kind of just do it as a team and sit down, with your trustees and talk about it at the next meeting. So I think that's a great kind of initial place to start. And then I love, reserve studies I think are really helpful. And there's a lot of good firms that do that. And then I think even as maybe it's less giving you long-term quotes the way reserve studies do, but even just having a good building inspector, the same way you would if you were kind of buying a property, paying someone a couple $1,000s to walk through and just assess the life, and the current status of your major systems, I think can be very helpful.
Well,
I see so much in this that it's just, you just got to get your arms around at least where are we at currently and understand that so that you can really dream and plan about where God's calling you to.
so I know there's a lot to do and a lot of paperwork that gets generated. Who in the church is the best driver to undertake those, filling out those papers and consolidating them in one place so that, churches kind of roll over, trustees, volunteers come and go. How best to accumulate, who should drive that process?
I'll take kind of a stab at it, Matt, and I'll be curious. It's a great question, Jeff. I wonder if Matt and I even have different answers. But I think I have seen some really helpful when you have enough kind of manpower within your church to have a full facilities team, kind of lay leaders, a kind of a committee that kind of oversee and share some of that just general workload. And then I think if you're blessed to have a church admin that really kind of knows the files, is in the weeds with paying bills every month, kind of is helping on that side, that kind of the chair of that committee and the admin can often be a dream team, because they're kind of seeing both sides of it, and frankly neither are getting too worn out. I think that's what's hard about this too, is this is just a lot to manage as an individual, but that can be a great place to start from some of the churches that we've been working with. But do you have any other thoughts, Matt, or anything I'm missing there?
No, I think that's right. One of the problems we have seen in the past is, you say, hey, okay, where's all the blueprints and where's all of this stuff? Oh, Deacon Smith has those. Oh, okay, where's he at? He died 30 years ago, and no one knows where it's at. And so I think it's really important that you have a continuation of history. So if there is a committee, for example, there's probably someone that stays on that committee or is point. But even more so, like with blueprints, and say you have you did an assessment, a reserve study, and it's on the computer, but then you get a new computer. That is that you print out some of that stuff. And maybe I'm old school. I joke, Jeff, that I still have a Rolodex, so that kind of tells you where I'm at on some stuff. And but you actually have a closet or somewhere that contains your blueprints, your environmental studies, whatever major work you had done in a file cabinet somewhere, that it's there. And if you ever need to go to it, it is physically there. And so, but I do think that, if you're big enough and you have an executive pastor, then that person could run with it. But if there's somebody and most churches do have a deacon or a trustee or somebody who's kind of in charge of the facilities, that would be, I think, the person that should be point on these
Oh,
types.
yeah.
And especially when you're blessed enough for that person, maybe professionally, to have a background in engineering or even surveying or, even plumbing, like basic, that just kind of has at least some facility groundedness. I think that can be often really helpful too.
Are there any software providers that you know of that help track this sort of thing?
Yes. I'm trying to think of the one name, and when we're done, I'll get you one, but they do have a program that helps track the maintenance of your property.
Okay, if you get that to me, I'll make sure it gets in the email that goes out to everybody.
Yep.
So that they have an idea of an easy and affordable solution. We'll take care of that.
Sure.
But yeah, people often ask me, how long should we keep our insurance policies? And my usual answer is until Jesus comes back.
Yep.
Because those are forever documents.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think
I agree.
property is a lot like that too, right?
Oh,
It
for sure. Go ahead, Carl. I'm
I
sorry.
was just going to say it absolutely is. And I think it's very interesting as churches are tax exempt properties, the property appraiser or local county, or city government documents don't often even have the best, most accurate square footage or when the roof, was pulled to do the permit. I mean, there's a lot of things that frankly can get kind of lost when a property is not consistently on the tax rolls. And so I think that, to your point, Jeff, speaks even more to why you have to keep consistent documentation.
Yeah, and I can tell you that all of that information is vital when you're shopping insurance because they want, everybody likes the big shiny options, right? Everybody wants to insure the Church of Resurrection in Kansas. Uh, they know it's taken care of. They know that, there's staff there that handles everything. And for a small church, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
But having that information and being able to provide that to an underwriter can really make you a better account and give you more options for carriers, especially for the admitted carriers. And now what they're doing with churches in terms of, like 60% of the churches that we insured this year were non-renewed by their carrier. So, the more you have, I have a question about, I know I'm not sure if GCFA has any ideas or recommendations on solar panels and energy storage. I'll research that and provide access to that again in the email if we have it. But do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that it's important when thinking about solar or even, a lot of churches have cell towers or are approached by groups that have cell towers, just to really, I mean, this goes back to our initial kind of first button,
Mhm.
that understanding what is God calling us to and having that be the lens that everything is viewed through, because we do see sometimes, and Matt, I'll be curious your thoughts, but that churches can get approached by these groups, whether it's solar panels or cell towers or things like that, and kind of just start to reactively make decisions based on income potential or, oh, we're not really using that plot of land anyway, or this could be a good fit, but not really thinking of the long term. What is, how does this overall serve our vision and mission? And I think that is really helpful because those things do just start to kind of snowball. All of a sudden, the cell tower needs to install another generator to have, more signal output. And all of a sudden, the solar panels, every 15 years have to have a reboot and you got to plan for that. And so I think that in making any sort of decision like that with your property, you need to make sure it's grounded in a lot of, what is every dollar, every, decision there shifting from a ministry perspective.
And I'll take a look at that and see if we can't address that with an article in our newsletter and put that up on our website. And I'll check with GCFA to see if they have anything. Um, let's see, finding, we have a question that's probably for me is finding the abuse and molestation exposures are making insurance hard to find. Are there any best practices beyond safe sanctuaries to help give insurers comfort? Um, I think a lot of conferences use different approaches. Safer sanctuaries is one approach. Ministry Safe is one that I've seen that does a really good job. But there are plenty of them out there. I would start with a Google search and try and see, which ones might give you help. I think the key there, again, is it's screening and rescreening, training and retraining, and record keeping. And if you have a policy, having a policy and not following it is oftentimes in court worse than having no policy at all. And I'll check. We have a follow-up on the solar panels to think if there's a provider that some other churches have used. I'm not aware of that, but I haven't been very involved in that. But we'll do some digging and see what we can come up with. And I think I've got to everything in the chat. If anybody has a question I haven't addressed, there's a little button at the bottom. You can raise your hand, and I'd be happy to come back to it. I think I've tackled everything. This has been really helpful. I really appreciate it, and look forward to the opportunity to maybe do a little more webinars. We haven't set our calendar for next year. So if you have a spot, actually, I understand they can't raise their hands. So if there's something that I missed, drop it in the chat here before I sign off. Thank you, JP. I appreciate that. Or Lori, whoever in our crack IT team corrected me. I'm kind of a rookie when it comes to the back end of the Zoom conference calls, although I've done a bunch of them. I learn something new every time. And I learned a lot today. I really appreciate it. I don't see any additional items in the chat. So I will close us out with a quick word of prayer. And just say again, thanks to Carlin and Matt for being with us today and letting us pick your brain.
Sure.
So, Lord, we just thank you for the opportunity to serve and to be served by the church that we belong to. And we ask that you would bless us in our mission and help us to be good stewards of the many gifts that we've been given. All right. Amen.